Hi, hi. Got it, got it. Okay, I'm gonna have some more coffee. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Megan Dean. I'm assistant professor of philosophy at Michigan State University. It's morning here, hence the coffee. Need for coffee. Welcome to the this meeting of the 2022 spring session of the Half Baked Online Colloquia series. This series is part of the activities of Culinary Mind, which is a leading international center promoting philosophical thinking on food. This series is organized by Andrea Borghini, Beatrice Sorini, Nicola Pires, and myself. And it aims to highlight new work on philosophical issues pertaining to food and eating practices, to spark discussion and debate, and to connect scholars working in this area. If you want to retrieve videos of our past events, you can go to our webpage under the media section. And if you want to stay up to date with Culinary Mind news, you can subscribe to our mailing list on our webpage or text us. So now it is a pleasure for me to introduce Uku Tooming. Uku is a research fellow in theoretical philosophy at the University of Tartu. He works on philosophy of mind with interest in aesthetics, specifically the structure of aesthetic appreciation, as well as epistemology. And among his recent publications of interest to Culinary Mind folks is a paper called The Aesthetics of Food Porn. But today, Uku will talk to us about flavor in the moment. So please join me in welcoming Uku.
Cool. Hopefully everyone can see the slides, I guess. I hope. So first, I would like to just say thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I've been attending the last 2 sessions, and it's been really fun. And also, I like the interdisciplinary aspect of the series. I myself, my area is, I mean, you could say maybe pure philosophy, but I guess it's not maybe that interdisciplinary. Although as Megan, I think, mentioned, my main area is philosophy of mind. So there's this sort of some like interdisciplinary elements in my research as well. But yeah, although I work on philosophy of mind first and foremost, in last almost 5 years, I've been really interested in aesthetics as well, and been quite active in trying to like work on topics in aesthetics. And I guess if I would try to like formulate this kind of general project I want to pursue, so I would say that I'm interested in this, like you could say like ordinary aesthetic life of limited agents, and what the rules and values of that kind of ordinary aesthetic life are. And within that context, I've been especially interested in this kind of weird aesthetic domains. So that's why I've been writing about food porn and bad movies. But the stuff I'm going to want to try that I want to talk about today is maybe a bit less silly, but it also concerns this kind of ordinary aesthetic consumers and how their appreciation of aesthetic domains looks like. So maybe it's good to begin with an autobiographical note. In a way, this talk is the most personal talk I've ever given in aesthetics, perhaps. But I think that this starting with this autobiographical note is kind of useful and pertinent. So years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I lived in Boston, or Cambridge, Massachusetts, to be more exact. And since it's an expensive place and I didn't have much money, I lived on a budget. And I was always trying to like find places where I could have some food that's affordable but still special. And so probably my favorite place that I found was a place called Kimchi Kitchen, which unfortunately is closed now, so you can't go there. but the kimchi fried rice that place served, that became my, like, eating that each week became almost like my ritual. And so I got to know that dish really well, at least how it was served in that place. And from that time, then already I had this kind of sense that there's a similarity between how at least I, and I hope like so many other people also, there's a similarity between how people engage with some of their favorite dishes and their favorite songs. And so it seemed to me that maybe it's fruitful to think of to compare food appreciation and music appreciation in parallel and see if they can like illuminate one another. But it's only now when I've now like tried to formulate my thoughts more clearly. Still, this is very much, I mean, it's a very typical thing to say, it's very much a work in progress, but it's so much work in progress that I suspect that depending on your feedback, it might not even result in a paper. It's very much I'm kind of exploring and trying this out, these ideas. So that's the preliminary. That's the autobiographical note. Now come the preliminaries actually, and there's a bunch of them actually. Just to introduce this topic more closely. So I suppose it's like acceptable to say that that food and popular music in particular are not usually seen as paragons of aesthetic value. I forgot to qualify what I talked earlier. I'm focusing on popular music, so not classical, not jazz, but like rock, pop, electronic dance music. I mean, it's very still very broad, but I hope like we have this kind of intuitive sense what popular music is in contrast with classical or jazz, for instance. So in any case, it seems that food and popular music are not usually seen as paragons of aesthetic value. They usually are assigned to these lower arts, and they don't really, at least historically, they haven't really received maybe that as much philosophical attention as some other art forms or aesthetic domains. But I mean, it's very welcoming trend in recent decades already that people have become more and more interested in both of those domains. But still, I mean, it's just like historically there seems to be this kind of certain view on food and popular music that sees them in a like more in kind of as something relatively low, so to speak. But it's also, I think, as an empirical guess, I think it's true that food and popular music in a contemporary world are maybe those domains that are central to aesthetic lives of a like large number of people. So that's where like when people, if you talk about what matters aesthetically for like regular people, I mean, it's very like vague term maybe, but what matters to people very often is like aesthetically is food and popular music. And another qualification regarding popular music, I'm interested in recorded music in particular. Now, like looking back again at my autobiographical description, and now we can like think of now I can state the aim of this talk. So my aim is to explore what it means to aesthetically appreciate food by comparing it with listening to recorded popular music. And then as I tried to like argue, there's this relevant similarities between those two types of appreciation, then maybe like looking at music also helps us like throw fresh light on appreciation of food as well. Okay. And as another like preliminary remark, it seems to me that when we think about food and the aesthetic appreciation of food, then one way to argue for the aesthetic significance of food appreciation is to claim that at least some dishes have like symbolic or maybe representational content. So in Karen Korsma's book, Making Sense of Taste, there are some interesting suggestions as to how food can exemplify certain interesting thoughts or values. And I don't want to like say that this kind of approach is bad or one shouldn't engage in it. It's like it's actually very fruitful and very interesting, and it's entirely possible that whatever I say in this talk, I mean the value of this kind of approach to food still stands. But it seems to me that if the focus is so much on the symbolic representation content of dishes, then this kind of approach is in danger of looking away from the flavor properties themselves, and locates the aesthetic value of food in something else than those flavor properties. And kind of analogously, in case of popular music, or at least like pop music, which is actually more narrow domain. In case of pop music, at least, there's like, you can see quite a bit of this kind of representational approach, where representational content is seen as this kind of primary focus of appreciation. So I hope I don't do injustice to Enrico Terone, so because it seems to me that his view is along those lines, that pop songs are primarily appreciated through empathy, where the mind of the singer is the appreciative target. And if you look at Nick Wiltshire's criticism of Terone, then his positive view is still that the appreciative focus of pop songs is on the represented thoughts and feelings. So in case of popular music, and pop music in particular, there's this kind of approach. You can also see that kind of approach where the focus is on the representation content. But it seems to me that there's also different kind of engagement in popular music, where this representation or content doesn't matter that much, and like these kind of engagements are best exemplified by, for instance, listening to songs written in foreign languages, which you can still appreciate aesthetically, I guess, I take it, and appreciating instrumental tracks, for instance. So bringing out now Korsmeyer on one hand and Terone and Wiltshire on the other, to repeat, my intention is not to even like reject anything in their particular views. It's more like I just want to kind of bring out this like context where there's one particular theoretical focus, but that kind of theoretical focus kind of might hide from a view, even at least sometimes, the other possible theoretical focus, which kind of looks at the sensory properties of the thing that is appreciated. So both in the case of food and popular music, this kind of representational approach can overlook, I mean, let's say not tends to, but can overlook the aesthetic value of flavor properties and sonic properties in themselves, respectively. But I'm like, what I want to discuss in what follows is how appreciation of food, qua food, and music at its basic level can focus on how their sensory properties unfold, and not so much on what their symbolic or representation content is. So just to define my to find a focus on my approach, I wanted to discuss these things. Okay, now we can move to the meat of the issue, so to speak. So I'm going to talk about basic appreciative focus. I think, used those terms. And I'm going to talk about basic appreciative focus in case of food and music, which I take to be relevantly similar. And hopefully the following quote helps to illustrate what I mean by basic appreciative focus in case of food. And I suspect some of you know this passage already, those who have read Tom Lopez's book, Being for Beauty, because he also refers to it or cites it. So, and it's by Mark Miller, who is this, I think, relatively well-known chef. And here he describes the flavor profile of a raisin. So I read it. When you bite down, it is sweet in the beginning. It has a medium tempo and flavor. It becomes tannic on the edge. It gets a little bit juicier, and it gets highly accentuated sugars and a little bit dusty in the meat palate over time. There's a certain intensity that goes up, and then a sweetness dies off, and then a tannin dies off, and what you're left with is a kind of seedy little bit of sweetness that follows through. What you have is this curve of experience from a single raisin! Exclamation mark. I wanted to bring out this particular quote because I think nice thing about it is that although, I mean, Mark Miller presumably is much more able to discriminate different flavors than like ordinary person has, but that it seems to me, at least for me, and I hopefully for others, it's the description is pretty easily recognizable. It's not like a very obscure esoteric comment of some sort of food critic, but it's actually everyone who's tasted raisin and whose flavor, like whose tasting capacities are in proper order, can pretty much recognize this description from and relate it to their own experience. And I think it also illustrates this basic appreciative focus, which is on the way in which a flavor profile of a dish or a particular item develops over time. And the whole focus is on the development in the present, in the moment, from moment to moment. So if you can call this the basic appreciative focus, then I hopefully it's possible to make an interesting comparison with music appreciation. So Gerard Levinson has defended the so-called concatenationism about music comprehension, which is most supposed to contrast with so-called architectonicism about music appreciation. And for Levinson, what concatenations means is that when it comes to basic appreciative focus, in case of music, the focus is on small scale temporal the sonic structures and how, and when one exercises focus, when one follows the piece or the development of the sonic profile from moment to moment. And concatenations in contrast with architectonicism, because architectonicism claims that actually these large scale structural and formal features of a piece have to factor into the basic appreciative focus as well for one to really actually comprehend the what one is listening. And if in case of Levinson also, I mean, his interest is in classical music, but for me it seems that concatenationism can be maybe relatively unintuitive when it comes to classical music, given that in case of pieces in classical music, large-scale formal features arguably are relevant, because without really grasping them, one doesn't really get the point of a piece. But it seems to me that actually concatenationism is relatively more plausible in the case of food, like in the case of popular music, because that's my empirical bet that ordinary listener is not so much interested in this kind of broader structure of the piece, and they don't really need even to be interested in that for them to exercise their basic appreciative focus. So that's the idea of concatenationism in case of music. And I think when we now think of food appreciation, then it makes sense to say that in the case of food, this basic appreciative focus concerns attentive absorption in unfolding of the flavor profile and sensitivity to the changes in flavor in the moment. And those kind of wider temporal scales or the formal features have only secondary significance, if any significance. So that's also, I think, hopefully corresponds well to Mark Miller's description of how he experiences raisins also. So what I've tried to suggest, at least I've tried to suggest that this kind of basic appreciative focus in case of both food and popular music appreciation concerns those moment-to-moment developments in the flavor profile or sonic profile. And I'm sure there are many issues with this proposal, but I would like to bring up certain issues which concern the putatively glaring differences between music and food. So in case of music, expressive content arguably is very important also when it comes when this kind of moment-to-moment small scale appreciation is concerned. And evidence also bears it out, and like empirical evidence bears it out, given that, for instance, in a study by Jusslin and Isaksson, Swedish music psychologist, expression was rated as the most important criterion of aesthetic value in music by both musicians and non-musicians. And on the other hand, in case of food, the expressive content arguably is not relevant. It's even like open question if food has expressive content. So here we seem to have a pretty glaring difference between those two domains. So what can I say in response? Well, I have like three kind of tentative responses. First one, I think, is the weakest, but I still want to point out that the research by the same scientist has also brought out that regular listeners are not well positioned to identify like fine-grained emotional content of music, like whether music expresses anger or grief or what's kind of particular emotions. Rather, according to Jusslin, the expressive, like what regular listeners do identify are these more coarse-grained features like valence and intensity. And so, I mean, this point was just in order to kind of temper this claim regarding the importance of expressive content. So not any kind of expressive content is crucial in the case of music appreciation. It's more these coarse-grained features. And perhaps very speculatively, it is possible to argue that food can also at least instantiate these more coarse-grained features. But elaboration on that point would be for Q&A or for future research, because I want to also consider two other responses to the expressive content concern. So it's even if expressive content is really important in case of music appreciation, it's still important to note that the expressiveness of music is realized by the base sonic properties of the piece. And the attentive experience of the unfolding of such base properties can be still common both to music and food. So the fact that there are these really like noticeable differences between music and food doesn't mean that there aren't interesting similarities that still deserve our attention. And as a third point, although the expressive content of food is very much under debate, is debatable, I think is what's pretty much given is that food definitely arouses feelings and even emotions. So like exhilaration and comfort, etc. And presumably, again, it's my empirical bet. I might be wrong, but in the case of opera music, it's plausible that listeners' own arousal actually matters more for appreciation than the expressive content of the music itself. So, as a very speculatively, I would even like suggest that maybe when people really stress the importance of expression as it is revealed in those studies, they might sometimes just mix up the expressive content of music with their own emotional reaction. So arguably the arousal, the emotions that the emotions that music arouses are actually even actually more central than the emotions that are expressed in the piece. As another possible difference between food and music, and here I'm going to be quite brief because I want to gallop through other stuff as well in my talk. And here it's very tentative as well, but case could be made that in case of food appreciation, there's more room for the control of the experience in terms of how the consumption experience is shaped, because the eater can choose how they pick up the food, how they chew the food, whatnot. But in case of music, you could say that maybe the room for control is less so, because you can maybe close off your ears, but you can't maybe do much more. But here, if we focus on music in recorded contexts, then it seems to me that level of control over that kind of music is much higher. So I'm not really sure what to make of this possible concern regarding my comparisons, but I think it's kind of interesting thing to think about a bit more, like how agency is involved in food appreciation on one hand, and music appreciation on the other. But I don't think there's this immediate challenge to what I've tried to argue for. Okay. So what I've tried to do thus far, I've tried to suggest that there's interesting similarities between food appreciation and music appreciation when it comes to the basic appreciative focus. But the remaining part of the talk, I would like to discuss some further questions, further issues. And the first one concerns the value that this appreciative focus could give access to. And I'm going to talk about replay value soon, but before that, we should think of about that appreciative focus a bit more. So it seems to me that there are two aspects to that. Namely, first thing is that this exercise of that kind of focus is pleasurable. Usually it is pleasurable, and I'm interested in cases where it is pleasurable, at least. And a bit more speculatively, I suspect it also trains the powers of flavor discrimination. Especially if you over over a number of occasions, you engage in the same kind of exercise with respect to one kind of dish, then arguably it improves your ability to discriminate different flavors in that dish. At least I hope that that's what happened with me when I repeatedly had my kimchi-free fried rice over almost 2 years. And if that's the case, then the pleasure bit of that kind of appreciation can be compared with Mohan Mathan's conception of facilitating pleasures. So in different papers, I think Mathan has used slightly different terms, but at least when he talks about facilitating pleasure, he has in mind pleasures taken in activities that motivate further engagement in that activity. So they kind of make this kind of activity easier to perform. And in case of pleasure taken in exercise of that kind of appreciative focus, I would say that this pleasure also can be at least compared with the facilitating pleasure as Mathan defines it. But interestingly, it's given that both like songs or tracks and dishes, appreciation of them has this natural endpoint. I mean, they're relatively short-term experiences. It makes sense to argue also that it's not like this pleasure taken in food appreciation just motivates maintaining the focus. It also makes sense to think that the pleasure taken in that exercise can also motivate the engagement with the dish again after an appropriate interval. So it motivates returning to that dish again and again. So using again that music analogy, I proposed that analogously to songs, in virtue of generating that kind of motivation to return to the piece, dishes have replay value for the agent. Using these terms, kind of even I use these terms to accentuate the music-food comparison also. So, okay, if there are replay values which consist of like the capacity of a dish to motivate further like repeated engagements, there are also possible concerns regarding this idea, basically, at least when it comes to the aesthetics of food appreciation. So there's this concern, and I'm sure there are many others, is that this kind of idea of replay value, I mean, this replay value is like very, it lacks subtlety, and at best can be considered only as this kind of very minor value, if even value at all, because like maybe a straightforward comparison with this replay value idea is, in a music context, is the earworm. So earworm is such a song which motivates you to kind of replay it in your head over and over again. It's almost always a very annoying thing. And if now one wants to claim that this is the song has replay value, then either this replay value is very minor, or it's very, or one might even ask why call it value at all. Similarly in case of fast food. I mean, fast food also has in a way replay value, also has kind of replay value, but again, it seems like it's very minor then. Here I just want to mention one response here, And here I'd like to invoke John Dyke, who in his quite recent paper on the aesthetics of country music has considered maybe this at least comparable issue, namely that some people might argue that country music, the value of country music, given that country music is very simple, it also, because of this, the value of country music is very minor, if a value at all. And Dyke has this pretty nice and interesting response to that concern or objection. So I quote, simple art can play a greater practical role because it is easy to grasp. Country music can seep into our daily lives. We can make it part of everyday driving, drinking, and dancing. For many folks, there is no time to experience art apart from everyday life. And there is no mental space for art that requires mental acrobatics. If art is to knit into the weave of our everyday lives, then it often needs to be sonically and lyrically simple. And now, like analogously to Dyke's response to that concern, I would suggest that by having replay value, food can still, but I can argue that food, by having replay value, can more easily be weaved into everyday life than more complex objects of appreciation, also in the case of food appreciation. So this concern might not have much bite insofar as replay value, the importance of replay value can be vindicated in such a way, in a way how Dyke tried to indicate the value of simplicity in case of country music. Now, that's basically the last bit, and it's the shortest one, I think. So in this last part, I would just like to very briefly discuss this possibility that replay value also generates certain kind of aesthetic reason. And here I appeal to T. Gwen's also very recent work. I think this is still forthcoming. It's not published yet. Paper called Transparency Surveillance, I think was the title. And he tries to make this case that there are some reasons that can only be adequately understood by members of a particular group based on their shared experience. And let's call them intimate reasons. So Gwen's context in that paper is mostly expertise and like public communication expertise, where he tries to argue that, well, the value of transparency is sometimes quite dangerous, given that if an expert has to let themselves be guided by the value of transparency all the time, then this makes it so that the expert, in order to convey their reasons in an understandable way for an audiences, have to distort those reasons in their communication, given that the wider audience is not really able to fully understand the expert's reasons. And now it might sound like a bit funny that I kind of appeal to intimate reasons in my context, given that it doesn't concern expertise at all. But it's notable that also Gwen is actually more, although the focus is on the issues in expertise and science, he actually briefly considers also how aesthetic reasons are intimate reasons, given that in order to grasp them, one has to be familiar with object of aesthetic concern. And so, using this idea, I think we can employ this notion of intimate reasons in the present context also, very tentatively, of course. So what I want to suggest is that the replay value of food can generate intimate aesthetic reasons. So reasons to do what? Like reasons to appreciate the dish in a particular way, maybe for something else as well. I'm not sure. But the idea behind this suggestion is that intimate aesthetic reasons are only shareable between agents who have shared a sufficiently similar trajectory of engagement with the target of aesthetic concern. And only because of sharing the same trajectory of engagement, one can be in a position to grasp that replay value. So insofar as this kind of shared the shared experience, a precondition for sharing the reasons, the exercise of appreciative focus with respect to a particular dish can perhaps also generate intimate reasons, intimate aesthetic reasons, you know. But as I said, that's like the shortest bit. I mean, I'm very much interested in what you think. But at least I would like to conclude at this point. So what I try to argue for, at least suggest in this talk, were like three ideas. First was that food and popular music share similar basic appreciative focus. Second claim was that focus gives access to the replay value of the dish or the piece respectively. And the third claim was that the replay value generates intimate aesthetic reasons. And also you can see some references here. And that's it. I'm very much interested in what you think about these rather rambling thoughts of mine. I thought maybe it was appropriate to also finish with like a half-eaten picture, a half-eaten dish. We have a half-baked colloquium. Now I finish in such a so appropriate way myself as well. Thank you.